as more and more data is being available globally to push forward healthcare and pharma as a whole to help patients more. I think this is what's going to drive or be a catalyst for us to be able to have more robust and validated models. AI won't replace you, but a guy using AI will.
Good afternoon, everyone, for joining. While this is a virtual session, we wanted this to be idea sharing, opinion sharing, and then ask questions as many as we have because we have great speakers for today. Let me introduce our first speaker for today. Who is a visionary leader and at the forefront of AI innovation in the healthcare. Nirneet is the founder and CEO of Silico Minds, a company revolutioning drug development through AI-driven modeling and simulation solutions. With over a decade of experience as a tech entrepreneur, Nirneet also co-founded Anipanian, the world's leading veterinary virtual care platform. He holds a BBA from Babson College with a focus on technology, entrepreneurship, and design, and has completed executive education at Harvard Medical School, specializing in implementing AI solutions in healthcare. That's definitely incredible qualification from your academic, Nirneet. Nirneet is a recognized thought leader within the Indian pharmaceutical industry, frequently speaking at top-tier forums like ICR, BioAsia, and SAC, AACP, where he also shares his deep expertise in AI, regulatory strategy, and digital health innovation. As the co-chair of the Avicenna Alliance AI Task Force, he is actively shaping international policy around AI adoption in healthcare. Under Nirneet's leadership, Silico Minds has partnered with over 70 global organizations to drive faster, smarter, and safer drug development. His work bridges the gap between cutting-edge technology and regulatory science with real-world impact across pharma, biotech, and life sciences. Today, Nirneet will guide us through the transformative power of AI in healthcare, unpacking how intelligent systems can reshape everything from R&D to clinical trials and regulatory pathways. Join me in giving a warm welcome to Nirneet as he joins us today. Thank you so much for joining us and accepting our request to be the guest speaker for today, Nirneet. You definitely have a very incredible portfolio on your bio. Thank you so much for joining us. A huge round of applause and welcome to this space, Nirneet. Now, let me introduce our second speaker, that is Pranav Kamwar, trailblazer in the application of AI modeling and simulation within the pharmaceutical industry. With over a decade of experience working with global pharmaceutical leaders, he has made significant contributions to the development and regulatory advancement of biopharmaceutical products. Throughout his career, he has specialized in biopharmaceutics control strategies and advanced computational modeling to accelerate drug development pipelines. From early stage R&D to regulatory submission, he has led cross-functional teams in delivering innovative solutions that are not only scientifically robust but also aligned with regulatory expectations. His work has consistently bridged the gap between data science and practical real-world pharmaceutical applications. Currently serving as Chief Scientific Officer at Silico Minds, he is spearheading the scientific vision behind the company's AI-driven in silico platforms. His leadership is helping redefine how pharma companies design, test, and validate therapies faster and more efficiently than ever before. Dr. Pranav has also been instrumental in cultivating global partnerships and dialogues with leading regulatory agencies, including the FDA and EMA, to promote broader acceptance of digital and simulation-based methodologies. He is passionate advocate for the transformative power of computational science. He is not just shaping the products, he is shaping the future of pharmaceutical innovation. Please do join me in welcoming Dr. Pranav, a visionary scientist and industry leader dedicated to unlocking the full potential of AI in healthcare. Having both of you is a pleasure on this session. session. Thank you so much for joining us. So, without any further delay, today we will have a very interesting topic, that is model informed drug development in AI era. So, all of you be ready, and we will delve into the session. All over to you, Nirneets, to start with.
Great. All right. So, good afternoon, everybody. So, today's session is titled Model Informed Drug Development, or MIDD, as an acronym. So, as the name suggests, today we're going to explore how MIDD, a traditionally mechanistic and model-based approach, is now being redefined by artificial intelligence and machine learning. So Dr. Pranav and I today will go into a little bit of deep dive, give you a holistic 100,000 foot view, and then of course go into some success stories and real world use cases. So please, next slide, Shrija. So I know there's a lot of terms out there in terms of, hey, you hear in silico, you hear AI, you hear ML, you hear computational modeling and simulation, but how do these all interact, right? And so this slide essentially prefaces how we can look at this and how these technologies interact. So as I was saying a little bit earlier, computational modeling and simulation, or using computers to simulate or model scenarios, has been around for decades now. It's been used in many industries such as automobile, airplanes, power plants, nuclear power plants, and pharmaceutical industry is no different. So the first mechanistic models were built decades ago. So computational modeling and simulation essentially is the creation or use of mathematical, mechanistic, statistical-based models to simulate or study complex systems or processes. Specifically, we know this discipline is pharmacometrics, for example, or biostatistics. Now you're seeing this other bubble over here to the right, which is artificial intelligence or machine learning. So essentially, artificial intelligence is the advancement of computing capabilities today, where systems can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, such as learning, reasoning, pattern recognition, problem solving, and decision making. So when you combine these two approaches together, that's where we get truly the biggest impact. And then even if you go a little bit lower, you guys hear about ChatGPT, LLMs, right? So that subset there where you see generative AI, which of course I'm sure everybody on this call today has used ChatGPT or Google Gemini model or any sort of these models that are readily available now and integrated with our smartphone. But the idea of an LLM or generative AI is where it can create new data, new text, new images, videos, or analysis, essentially based on the fundamental principles of artificial intelligence and machine learning, where a system can learn based on patterns, recognition, as discussed. So all of these technologies combined can be considered in silico. So we have in vitro, we have in vivo, and now we have in silico. And I truly do believe that today is the dawn of a way forward for the pharmaceutical industry, where in silico is going to be a norm for traditional drug development processes across all value chains. So, and then of course you can take it one step higher from in silico, where the FDA likes to use the term quantitative medicine. So you have qualitative medicine, a lot of what we do in the lab, and then quantitative medicine, where we're making sense out of a lot of data. So next slide, please. So again, elaborating further on this is that there are two types of models essentially that are ways of looking at it. One is a data model, and these data models are essentially the fundamentals of artificial intelligence. As I mentioned earlier, they're based on existing data. They're able to correlate between patterns, clusters, and make relationships and correlations. So it's making predictions on what is already observed. Now, mechanistic models, on the other hand, and these models constitute a lot of the traditional modeling and simulation approaches that have been around for decades in pharma, including, I'm sure you guys must have heard of, if not, things like population PK or PBPK or PK or PD modeling type approaches. So these capture cause and effect and understanding. They make predictions prior to build, where like data is scarce, hard to generate, or non-existent. And it takes into account physiology, mechanistic, chemistry, So these sort of things. Now, if we can make or combine both these models together in a holistic in silico program for, let's say, a pharmaceutical program, this is where we can make powerful things happen, because it's not just one approach that works, but it's a combination of both that can get us the most accurate or a reliable output. And then, as you can see, kind of there to the right, you can see, for example, at the top there, we have a picture there of the heart, and below you can see as well how there's a mechanistic model of the heart, as well as a medical device, and how essentially that medical device is interacting with the heart. So these models, again, can help us with understanding quite a bit in terms of pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics at an organ level, at a human level, how things interact and how we can create meaningful outcomes. So next slide, please. Again, looking at it from a industry standpoint, and I've highlighted three main areas. I know a lot of folks today are from India here on the call. So generics is probably a very important topic for the audience today, but there's also discovery and then APIs as well, which we do have a lot of API development happening in India today. And I truly do believe that India can be a forward-leading thinker and innovator in discovery through the adoption of these types of technologies. But the idea is that, hey, we've been doing drug development traditionally. And so you can see there, for example, in generics, we have starting with the formulation to the IVIVC to the bioequivalent studies to actually getting it into the approved and into the market. In discovery, as you know, from end to end, it's, discovering the molecule, going through the non-clinical for the safety and the efficacy to the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and in some cases, phase 4 accordingly. And then again, through market approval and regulatory approval. And then with APIs, we're looking at route selection, process optimization, purification, and CMC submission. So at each stage of the process, model-informed drug development can be applied to better predict or better forecast the whole process. So I think one of the key things here is that, for example, traditional approaches are now being further, in terms of time and simulation time being heavily reduced. So, for example, a PBPK model can be executed in a matter of weeks or days as opposed to months if you combine AI technology with it. And so this is the power of how some of these technologies are working in tandem. So you can look at it as layers, and we're adding on top of these layers. From a regulatory standpoint as well, and if you don't mind, please going to the next slide. FDA is leading in the world, and I would say is a benchmark for other regulatory agencies globally in the terms of how we look at in silico-based evidence. So the FDA states by 2030 that more than 50% of all dossier submissions will include some sort of in silico evidence. So that's a very aggressive target. In fact, even the EMA has stated by 2030 they want to reduce animal testing to zero, which is why you also hear in some cases people saying non-clinical as opposed to preclinical. So, but just to look at a timeline, and we use the FDA as a poster boy for sort of spearheading how global regulatory agencies can accept this type of evidence. You can see that in 2003 to 2013, in that decade, that modeling and simulation models in terms of bioequivalence, like these early days PBPK models, POP-PK models, mechanistic models, were actually developed at the FDA. So this regulatory science and these modeling sciences were pioneered very early on. And then in 2013, there were disease models that were created based on disease progression and the actions of a disease, the potential relapse of the disease, and how therapeutics can affect a diseased patient. So all these types of models were actually created in 2013. Now, fast forward to 2018, the FDA had launched a program called Model-Informed Drug Development. So this program allows applicants, IND applicants, to actually have pre-meetings with FDA agents where you can say, this is what we're working on. How can we incorporate modeling and simulation and essentially get a pre-approval or buy-in from the regulatory side of the house to apply certain modeling and simulation approaches or AI-based approaches and have that data or evidence considered as a part of the filing. So this was a very successful program that was launched by the FDA, where in 2023, they extended this program to create something called MIE, Model Integrated Evidence Program, for generics players, so and applicant, where similarly you can have preemptive meetings with the FDA. You can present through a modeling analysis plan what you would like to do, what is your hypotheses or arguments that you're trying to make in terms of answering with your modeling and simulation data, and get that buy-in even before a pharmaceutical company or companies like us start developing, validating, and simulating models and in getting that data together for the package. And in 2024, they went all in and established a quantitative medicine center of excellence. So the FDA is very well equipped with assessing this type of data. They're agnostic to tools. So there's a lot of softwares out there that can be used for these purposes to generate in silico evidence. And they're well equipped to assess this type of data, reproduce this type of data, and then give sort of way forward based on that. Next slide, please. So as we talked about, here are just a few definitions for folks that may be familiar or may not be familiar with how the FDA defines these quantitative methods. So you can see here some of the key methods that we frequently use are included, such as population PK modeling, PBPK modeling, QSP modeling also is a very new approach that comes in the recent past 5 years or so. And so these are all approaches that allow us to understand, as we said, the PD, the PK, the dose responses, understanding how these drugs behave in patient populations across various patients, being able to run n number of simulations based on creating validated models. As you can see here as well, FDA, and I've circled it here, has included AI/ML. So it's not necessarily something that's completely different, but as I mentioned earlier, it's a complementary technology to these existing MIDD approaches. So that's why this whole talk is focused around how MIDD is being advanced with AI/ML. And also the regulatory agencies are looking at it from this perspective as well. Next slide, please. So I'd like to point your attention to actually a recent draft guidance by the FDA in January of 2025. This is for the consideration and use of artificial intelligence in drug and biological products for regulatory decision making. So at the end of the day, I know there is a lot of hype about AI, but what is the reality? How do we actually use this for meaningful outcomes for pharmaceutical companies and getting safer and more effective drugs approved and to market to patients in need? It all comes down to transparency of the AI. So as you can see here, the FDA has highlighted a risk-based credibility assessment framework. So today, the FDA already has stringent and in-place guidelines for example, PBPK modeling, population PK modeling, all these types of traditional MIDD approaches, where it's very clear. They know what they're looking for. They know how to reproduce what we share with them. And they have something that we need to fit into for them to consider it. In terms of AI, we talk a lot about things like, for example, garbage in, garbage out, right? As in terms of AI, what type of data was used to create an AI model? How do you must have heard of explainable AI, or how can you explain AI? So these are certain things that we need to take into consideration and explain this to a regulatory agency if we're using some sort of AI component in traditional MIDD. So examples of AI applications include predictive modeling for clinical PK and exposure response analysis, integrating diverse data sources for disease models and disease progression models, and then analyzing large data sets from real-world data, real-world evidence for endpoint development, and then even at a CMC level, automated assessment, manufacturing processes, scale up from lab to plant. So these are all areas where the FDA is looking at how AI can be reviewed or assessed and how it's helping the overall industry. It's a great guidance. I think the comments are already close to public. We did actually include some comments of our own on behalf of In Silico Minds, as well as my role with the Avicenna Alliance. But we are not far off where there is going to be a more formal documentation on the acceptance of AI combined with MIDD, while we already have the MIDD guidance. Next slide, please. So what about India? And I know a lot of people from India are here on this call today. So we're not yet there, but we're working towards it. And I'm very happy to say that our country is facilitating these discussions and moving in the right direction. For example, in July of last year, exactly a year ago, we met with DCGI, sir, as well as the rest of the honored members of CDSCO, as well as some ICMR members. We had a lot of industry folks with us as well. Dr. Reddy's modeling and simulation folk, many industry stakeholders that have been using this type of technology to launch their drugs in other markets, be it the US or be it EMA. But what about our own country, right? And how can we help our regulatory process and get safer and more effective medicines to the patient? What was great is that the DCGI did agree to, and it's noted here, there's a publication on this as well, happy to share it in the chat after, where they agreed that we will start to develop this capability in-house at the CDSCO and also understand on a case-by-case basis. And what's great is that we said, let's focus on generic. Right now, the current FDA director, Dr. Robert Lineberger of the Office of Generics at the FDA, clearly states that modeling and simulation makes more sense in generic drug development because you already have the safety and efficacy data of the innovator drug. So when you're developing a model or you're validating a model, you do have some existing data apart from the sponsor's clinical data to further validate or substantiate your actual model development and validation. So these were the talks, and I'm happy to say that they are very positive moving forward. We did have a meeting with Shri Amit Agarwal, sir, about a couple of months ago as well. He further seconded, saying that CDSO is working on this. So I think it's a matter of time before we start seeing some of these guidelines in our country. Also, I'd like to point your attention to this other publication that was launched recently here in January as a part of which I had co-authored along with a lot of subject matter experts in the field of AI, ML, and pharmaceutical development here in our country. And this paper is a position paper on the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I highly recommend that you guys can check this out and download this. This is available through the ISCR website, and it gives us a clear roadmap of where we are today, how MIDD, like POP-PK, PBPK, is already being used in pharmaceutical companies in India, and what is the next step in terms of how is AI/ML coming into the picture. So do please have a read of this very amazing document. Next slide, please. So just looking at this again, and then we'll jump straight into, okay, how does this really work? And this is all nice, but what are the case studies or real world impact? You can see here that in drug design, for example, in early design, we can predict 3D structures of a target protein, drug protein interactions. We can use traditional CAD-based approaches, like I'm sure you've known of molecular docking, MD simulations, alongside these new age AI tools to further refine and understand what is the best compound and where do we need to bet in terms of the right horse moving forward. Some notable tools that folks on our team use in our day-to-day basis and are well versed with include AlphaFold, DeepCam, DeepDoc, Molecular GPT, AtomNet, and PandaDoc. And then moving forward, we talked about some other areas here, but chemical synthesis is also a very interesting area where we're seeing how AI can help us with better prediction of yield, reduction of impurity in API synthesis, optimizing route of synthesis. And there are many tools out there, not just the traditional tools like Schrodinger, Reaxys, but furthermore, some AI tools that are coming out in the market that can refine this approach and make it faster. We have AI being used in drug repurposing. In fact, this is one of the first use cases that they taught in Harvard in this whole program, where they said this was where repurposing and AI, using AI was instrumental when the COVID pandemic happened. And that was where it was a true test, where a lot of people that didn't believe in silico started to believe in silico because of what happened during the pandemic and how AI was used to understand how we can repurpose certain drugs to combat the pandemic during that time. Deep Purpose and Deep Target, for example, are a few tools out there that can help us in this area. And then we have, of course, when we get into the drug screening, we can look at prediction of toxicity, immunogenicity, carcinogenicity, carcinogenic risk. Many things can be understood based on using some of these AI modeling approaches combined with traditional modeling approaches. And then finally, looking at from a non-clinical and clinical standpoint, as mentioned, we can, with minimal sponsor data, maybe reference data if we're talking about generics, we can look at how or predict or build custom models which can allow us to look at PK, PD. We can create virtual patients, synthetic patients, patient cohorts, geriatric, pediatric, different types of rare disease patient cohorts. We can understand patient stratification, cohort selection, better optimize, better inform our clinical trials, and in some cases also convince regulatory agencies for bio waivers, market extension waivers, label extension waivers. And so this is how all this kind of plays into the picture. Next slide, please. Now, I'm sure all of you guys have heard of this, and this I think is a big win for the industry as a whole, even though it didn't come from in silico minds. So this is a company called In Silico Medicine, and they used AI to find a drug for IPF, and from discovery to trial results in 18 months. See, now, if anybody asks you today, hey, has AI discovered a drug and it's gone to market? The answer is no, not yet. I mean, if you want to validate this technology as a whole, I would say the greatest validation is if this drug or any drug gets to the market and gets the market approval. Having said that, AI still is being validated across the value chain in terms of, let's say, getting bio waivers for clinical trials, getting bio waivers for certain safety or efficacy studies. So there are successes or milestone-based successes, but to say that end-to-end AI found this and we're at the finish line and it's on the market, not yet there, but very, very close. And I guarantee you, as soon as that happens, the floodgates are going to open globally for this. And I think India is in a very, very good position to handle this globally in terms of our technology talent as well as our scientific domain expertise and talent. And I truly do believe that we can transition just from generics and biosimilars and APIs into creating innovative medicine that will truly change the face of the planet. Next slide, please. And on to you, Dr. Pranav.
Thanks, Dhanil, for setting up the tone. So now we can just dive into this real world scenarios or case studies, what has been done using AI or model informed drug development, whether it can be customized model or it can be an AI driven model. So moving to the next slide, please. So yeah, let's begin with a case that highlights the power of in silico modeling in regulatory strategy, specifically supporting the label extension of a drug in multiple sclerosis or MS. Actually, the sponsor had a drug that was already being prescribed as an off-label for MS patient. There was a growing clinical interest and an increasing number of off-label prescriptions were also there. So, but to formally expand the label and to make the drug officially or widely accessible to the MS patients, a robust evidence was required. And for that, as traditionally, if you do that, then it requires a large, lengthy, and costly clinical trials to be conducted. So the sponsor requested that is there a way out that we don't need to conduct a clinical study or a trial? Can modeling and simulation activities can justify the clinical trial based on the data what we already have in hand, and the off-label administration can be made prescription based. So that was the main problem statement or the request from the sponsor, and the answer to that was yes. And for that, we have this methodology. What we have used is that we have designed and executed an in silico clinical trial using our advanced clinical trial simulator. And this simulator is unique in that it integrates both the innate and adaptive immune system dynamics as well as the complex multifunctional progression of MS. So first we constructed a large virtual patient cohort. Each virtual patient was assigned demographic and clinical characteristics that mirror with the real world population or real world MS population data, including age, disease stage, comorbidities, genetic markers, and we then simulated two arms. One group received the off-label treatment while the other did not. So this was the methodology in brief, that how we have attacked the problem statement, and then the model incorporated the known mechanisms of the drug action of the drug, because we have the data as well from phase 1 to phase 3. And then what the results, the simulations yielded a clear and robust results. In the treated virtual cohort, we observed a statistically significant slowing or relapsing of MS progression compared to the untreated group. Importantly, safety endpoints such as incidence of serious adverse events and immunological markers remained within the acceptable limits. So these evidence were presented to the regulatory body, and then the off-label administration was granted based on the modeling done on the virtual MS patients or the population. So, and the impact was that the sponsor was able to include the in silico evidence in the regulatory dossier when requesting a label extension. And the regulatory agency accepted the modeling results as a part of the totality of evidence, recognizing the scientific rigor and transparency of the approach as well. Because we have talked about the control arm and the patient population arm, how the progression has been delayed with the treated group when compared to the placebo group. So all these things has been modeled and shown in a very transparent and scientific way. So the approval was granted for the off-label. So if you move to the next slide, please. So yeah, this is just supporting that how it was affecting. So to further illustrate the value of in silico approaches, this is the quantitative impact in the MS case, this multiple sclerosis case. Using our AI-powered clinical trial simulator, we modeled disease progression and treatment effects in over 3,000 virtual MS patients. And this entire simulation was completed in just 1 day or two. And for comparison, a traditional clinical trial of this scale would have taken approximately more than 4 years, I will say. So, and that will cost also, as per the numbers, it's more than 20 million we're talking about. So this translates to a time saving of more than 96% and dramatic reduction in both financial and human resource expenditure. And such efficiency is transformative not only for sponsors and drug developers, but most importantly for the patients as well. So this case underscores the disruptive potential of in silico trials, especially when combined with AI-driven patient modeling and disease simulation. So it is a powerful example of how digital transformation can fundamentally reshape the clinical development landscape. And what we are showing here is the not fiction thing. It has been done. It has been approved. So, and the drug is already in the market based on off-label. It has now an RX prescription label has been granted to this drug as well. So these type of transformations has been done in the past, and what Nitin was mentioning, it is going to continue and it's going to flood it out in the future, what we think. So now moving to the next slide. So, and this slide is just talking about this, again talking about the clinical trials, because we're focusing on AI, how AI is helping in the drug development. And these development, what we are focused on basically on the clinical trials, because outcome what we are getting from AI modeling is leaps and bounds in a way. And this is a case where clinical trials recruitment was reduced by having a placebo group. That placebo group is an AI powered placebo group. So let's now turn to case study that highlights how one of the most promising and transformative applications of AI in clinical research. So traditional clinical trials, especially in the areas like rare diseases or serious chronic conditions, often face significant challenges with patient recruitment. Even the ethical issues are too much with the patient recruitment as well, because most of the times the placebo group is patients in the placebo group is not given the treatment, and that is also a bit concerning because, and that's why this recruitment takes a lot of time and ethical issues are there. So to address these challenges, what we have done an innovative approach using AI generated synthetic patients as part of the control arm in the clinical trial. So using advanced generative AI and machine learning algorithms, analyzed vast amounts of real world clinical data which has been generated, electronic medical records, historical trial data, to create highly realistic digital twins or synthetic patients based on the historical data which is published, based on the clinical trial which has been done. So using all this data, we are talking a vast pool of data. Using all this data, we tried to create a very realistic digital twin and what we term as a synthetic patient. And these synthetic control arm were used in the trial, and by integrating synthetic patients into the study design, we were able to significantly reduce the number of real patients enrollment. So this has not only streamlined recruitment and also reduced cost, so but also minimize the ethical burden what we're talking about for the patient group who are in the placebo arm. So how this is helping, or what is the impact of all these things? What we have already mentioned, the faster recruitment, reduced cost of patient burden, enhanced diversity and representation. So, and there's an ethical advantage as well, because we are not subjecting any of the patients in the placebo group which are required the treatment or the therapy. And the good thing is that regulatory acceptance is there with these ones. So increasingly regulatory agencies just like EMA and FDA, what even Nirnit was mentioning, are recognizing and endorsing the use of synthetic control arms, especially when supported by robust real world data. This case study demonstrates that how AI powered synthetic patients can produce scientifically credible regulatory accepted evidence. This is the case study which has also been approved by the EMA. So, and now moving to the next slide. Now we turn to a different therapeutic area and the development and approval of a new opioid antidote. The regulatory challenge was to gain approval for a new formulation without repeating the full spectrum of clinical efficacy and safety trials. And this is more or less a MIDD approach, which is more or less AI driven. And then we try to characterize the PK pharmacokinetic properties, talking about the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion profile for the new antidote formulation. And we used in silico modeling to bridge PK results with existing efficacy and safety data on naltrexone, which is published in the public domain or in the regulatory databases as well. And by simulating various clinical scenarios and outcomes, we could directly compare the new formulation with the reference product, quantifying any differences in exposure and also the predicted clinical effect. So the simulations demonstrated that the new formulation achieved equivalent or superior, equivalent I will say, or to slightly superior PK profiles compared to the naltrexone. And the regulatory agency accepted the in silico bridging strategy, granting approval to our sponsor based on the strength of the PK data and the predictive power of the simulations. So once we have a good predictive power for the simulation, what we have done, then the regulatory bodies are also convinced to give the approval as well. And this case highlights how in silico bridging can de-risk development, enable rapid product launches, and satisfy regulatory requirements with a fraction of the traditional clinical burden. Now moving to the next slide. This is a slide which we want to focus or talk about this because this is compelling case study that demonstrate the practical and regulatory impact of advanced in silico methodologies. And why it is? Because it is in a rare disease drug development, especially we're talking about ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So actually ALS is a devastating neurodegenerative disease characterized by progressive loss of motor neurons. So, and this slide is the title of the slide is showing this is the EMA has endorsed this. So the EMA's endorsement of this approach sets as a precedent for future rare disease trials, highlighting the growing acceptance of in silico and real-world data methodologies in regulatory decision making. So in summary, this case study exemplifies how model-informed drug development powered by advanced analytics and real-world evidence can overcome traditional barriers in clinical research and deliver meaningful benefits for patients, sponsors, and also the regulators alike. To address this, we developed a synthetic control group. Earlier, we also developed digital twin. In this one, it's a similar one where we developed a synthetic control group using again the real world data, a methodology which is endorsed by EMA. So I just want to emphasize that once you create a synthetic group using the real world data, means the physical data which is available. So this approach has been endorsed by EMA. So actually the ALS patients were enrolled for phase 2 trial. We initiated virtual patient simulations emulating the characteristics of the actual trial participants. So once we have the actual trial participants, we have the complete data for that one. And that data was used to create a virtual patient having the same and characteristics what that actual patient is having. So we have an actual patient which can be termed as a virtual patient. So a synthetic control group was based on a clinical and laboratory features. So using state-of-art predictive ALS models calibrated with a large database, we generated personalized predictions of disease progression for each participant. So the EMA recognized the scientific rigor and practical necessity of this approach because it was a rare disease. So they have also supported this because they know the necessity of this approach and this is not only facilitated the sponsor phase 2 trials, but also set a precedent for future studies in ALS or all the rare diseases as well. So what I will say that this case demonstrates how real world data, because whatever we are doing, we need a data, we need a base to do the extrapolation or to do the prediction for any unknown. We need a data in hand to build the model because the actual data helps us to replicate or simulate the similar thing what has been observed in the real world. So this real world data is a key to have for all these clinical trials or the rare disease recruitment. For the combined with the in silico modeling can overcome barriers in clinical research. Real world data combined with in silico modeling ultimately bring hope to patients with limited treatment options, especially for the rare disease. And this is also, we mentioned that this has been endorsed by EMA. The phase 2 clinical trial is going on with the virtual patients or the synthetic control group. So just want to emphasize that in summary, All these case studies collectively demonstrate the transformative potential of a model informed drug development and in silico methodologies. So, whether it's accelerating label extensions, saving years and millions in trial costs, enabling rapid approval of critical therapies, just like this antidote thing, or pioneering new regulatory pathways in rare disease. These approaches are redefining what's possible in drug development. By leveraging advanced modeling, simulation, and artificial intelligence (AI), we are not only meet but exceed regulatory expectations to some extent, I will say. I think delivering better outcomes for sponsors, regulators, and most importantly, the patients. So
All right. Uh, do we have the next slide there? I think that was a very insightful session, and thank you so much for all of it. And thank you so much, Nirneet, for answering all the questions from the chat. We do have a few more questions, what has been sent. The question is, how do we validate the efficiency of these AI models?
yeah. So actually, this AI model can be validated. Again, what we have emphasized is the actual data. Once we have the actual or the clinical trial data or the lab data for the volunteers or the patient population, so those data are also used to build the model, and those data can also be used to validate the model. What we termed it as an internal validation. And if some
Okay.
different set of data is available for the same disease conditions, which is not a part of the model building, then that data can be used to predict. And if the prediction error is less than 10%, then we say that the model is validated with extra internal and external validation approach. So the validation part is more or less data dependent. The data what has been there, we try to predict it using the simulation what we have developed. And if the predicted and observed data are falling in the same ballpark as per regulatory requirement, it should be less than 10%. So we say that the model is validated.
And also piggybacking on what Pranav said, it's also about access to this high quality relevant data. It's garbage in, garbage out. So, we have sponsored data that we're working with. There may be public data that's available out there, but more often than not, maybe that is not enough. And sometimes it takes private data sets that may not be readily available to the general public or for commercial needs. So it's trying to make sure that you have that diverse data sets to validate the model. As I mentioned in generics, it's a lot easier because we already have the sponsor data, we have the innovator data, we have publications. Maybe not in all cases, but 90% of the cases. And so I think it all depends again on what is the model trying to answer, what is the outcome. But I think the challenge can be solved. And I think earlier we were talking about it in this call is that as more and more data is being available globally to push forward healthcare and pharma as a whole to help patients more, I think this is what's going to drive or be a catalyst for us to be able to have more robust and validated models. And I think the FDA and regulatory agencies are on board with this mission as well.
Okay, that's helpful, Nirneet and Pranav. Thank you. Maybe I have another question from Manoj. His question is how AI is impacting the CRO industry.
Yeah, that's a great question from a business perspective. And there's this quote that goes around, right? That AI won't replace you, but a guy using AI will, right? And I think
Yes.
that quote itself can be applied across any industry and any business model at the end of the day. And CROs is no different. We can't be looking at it from a perspective that as an Indian CRO, my business is going to be cannibalized because I'm not doing more and more and more studies and for a client. Whereas I'm actually doing just the right amount of studies or model informed studies that increase my accuracy, that increase the probability of success, that give me the right patient cohort size. It's about efficiency, and at the end of the day that translates to success for their clients, for their pharmaceutical clients, and that success is what we're working towards. We do everything computing. I mean, we have fast computing power, we have access to supercomputers. Quantum computing is not yet there, but within another couple of years, hopefully, we'll have access to that, which can take these simulation times from days down to hours, right, or minutes. But we're working towards that, and I think it's very important that we do keep on the forefront of technology, it's not something that's going to replace you. It's something that's going to complement you. Formulators like you that have that knowledge, intimate domain knowledge to formulate a drug. It is a combination of you both that will make it successful.
There is a question from Pawan G that Gen AI, is it helpful in healthcare disease modeling?
Yes, so it's not necessary. So generative AI is like an LLM, right? It's a large language model. It's not necessarily that the LLM itself is a part of the disease modeling process. It's more
Mhm.
technologies like machine learning or deep learning that are more impactful for disease modeling at the end of the day. LLMs are more so for, as I mentioned very early in the first few slides, in terms of data models versus mechanistic models, where data models are LLMs at the end of the day, where they're looking at correlations, patterns, they're trained on something, and then they're able to analyze and give you something based on how it perceives this as this is the right answer at the end of the day, based on like how you train, right? A is for apple, B is for ball. But generative AI can be helpful in streamlining processes in terms of day-to-day operational flows. For example, 2 3 days ago, FDA commissioner just launched, right? FDA just launched their own internal AI tool, ELSA, which is a Gen AI tool. That is trained, of course, on probably a lot of it's customized LLM where it's trained on a lot of their proprietary FDA data, where it allows their regulators, whether it's a documentation review, for documentation review, or creating documents, or putting documents into certain templates. So that's kind of where Gen AI can help a lot. But please do check out the ISCR paper that we referenced. There's a really
Mhm.
nice section that highlights how Gen AI is impacting each stage of the drug development and discovery process.
The question from Swapnil is sponsor provided data also come from real patients or previously conducted trials. Is that comparable with synthetic data?
Yeah, so actually we have to build the synthetic data based on the sponsor data or from the earlier clinical trials which has been conducted. So the more closer symmetry of the synthetic arm with the actual data is, then the outcome will be more reliable. So I think what we are doing is that we are combining both the data, the sponsors data, along with the other clinical trial data, what we have mentioned earlier from our collaborations. So we have access to the data, and from there we can get the information about the clinical trials for the patient population or also for the placebo group. And these
Okay.
pool of data helps us in creating synthetic arm.
Great, great. I think that was all. I hope we have answered all of the questions, and this was very insightful. And we had a lot of questions that itself talks about how interesting the session was. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you again on Friday with another session with another speaker. So, thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank
Thanks, guys. Thanks
you.
again.